I'd like to ask for unanimous consent to have 30,000 petitions, a prop on the floor here, if I may have them delivered. I have over 30,000 petitions against SB 54, and I'd like to have consent to bring them to the floor.
One moment, Senator Anderson. Senator Monning?
Yes. In the interest of not turning this into a demonstration of volume of petitions, I would either request that we oppose that request or invite the member to bring in a demonstration of what you have collected that you could carry in your hand and not bring in wheelbarrows of petitions.
Senator Anderson, I think what Senator Monty has asked if you can bring a representative stack rather than bringing everything in. Would you be okay with that?
Well, what I'd like to share with the floor is that we offered to take a picture and bring a picture in, and rules declined that. So it wasn't a matter that we weren't trying to accommodate the floor. So I really haven't had a lot of choice. I could just hold this up and say that. That wouldn't really demonstrate the over 30,000. We're talking about reams and reams and reams of paper. But as long as everybody appreciates that we're talking about such an enormous amount, I will defer and not bring it to the floor. I don't want to hold up the debate. Right. But I would have preferred to have had a photo so that you could really get your arms around the fact that these are ordinary Californians who want their voice heard.
Right.
Senator Anderson,
if I could
Senator Wiese, Senator Anderson, so you're withdrawing your motion, and I think everyone can appreciate what 30,000 looks like, and I appreciate your congeniality.
Can I ask everybody to nod? No, I'm just kidding. So,
please proceed,
right,
Senator Anderson.
We heard a lot of magical things already with the presentation of the bill. What we didn't hear is what it will do to dreamers. What we didn't hear how this is the greatest threat that's ever been posed to dreamers. And let me tell you why. Actually, before I tell you why, let me just add this point. Every time we try to have an adult conversation about immigration, there are those that would immediately say, you're a racist, because we can't possibly have an adult conversation. Yet on this floor, over the last 4 years, 6 years that I've been on this floor, we have voted in a bipartisan manner, sending a clear message to both the Obama administration and the Trump administration. Well, this year we didn't, it wasn't bipartisan, but we would have had we been allowed to participate, send a clear message that immigration's broken. And we all get that. The question is, how do we move forward and what's in the best interest? So if you're of the thought that if you have an adult conversation on immigration, that makes you a racist, then not considering the 11,661 felons, convicted felons serving in our prisons who are undocumented, then you're a crime denier. And I think we have to not think about either one of those things, and we need to have an honest and earnest conversation. So let me explain to you why dreamers are so at risk by this bill. You see, this bill draws no distinction between people who come here to improve their life, to improve themselves, to lift themselves out of the poverty that perhaps they're in. And they come here and they want to work hard, they want to become U.S. citizens. And maybe they didn't come through the front door, but they still are here and they're still working towards that. Or maybe they came as a child and they had no choice. Their parents moved here and maybe they were 2 years old and all they ever did is speak English. And all the country they've ever known as home has been the United States. And I get those arguments. But what I don't get is confusing them with felons and treating them the same as felons. Because in my opinion, there is no good reason to shield felons from deportation. And yet that's precisely what SB 54 does. Now initially, SB 54 shielded all felons, and I want to thank the author because he's taken 2 amendments. Initially, he took violent felons out, so that meant murderers weren't there. And later, he took out serious, and that meant that child molesters and rapists were no longer there. But the bill isn't fully cooked. It still allows for human traffickers. If you're convicted and you're serving in our prison as a human trafficker, this bill shields you from deportation. If you have felony child abuse, this bill shields you. If you take hostages to prevent an arrest and you're serving in our prison, this bill shields you. If you are convicted of a felony and you had a hate crime enhancement, this bill shields you. Possession of restricted biological agents, and this bill shields you. If we were really serious about this, why wouldn't we just say no felons? You see, this bill continues to play hide the felon. It makes it difficult for ICE to identify these felons and deport them. It makes no distinction between people who come here to work hard to become U.S. citizens from those who come here to prey on others. And what's most despicable is they come from undocumented communities. You see, a lot of those criminals, when you talk to the police and the sheriffs, they'll tell you it's so important that they don't do immigration work because they need people in those undocumented communities to be able to feel safe enough to come forward and report the child molester in their neighborhood, to report the felony elder abuse in their neighborhood. And yet, this bill draws no distinction between the two. It's very, very important that we maintain that relationship with those undocumented communities because these felons first prey on the undocumented because they don't think they're going to get turned in. But they also prey on U.S. citizens. Those felons are bad guys. They should not ever become U.S. citizens. They deserve to be deported. And yet this bill continues to shield them. Now, I get what the author's trying to accomplish. We get that, but this bill's not fully cooked. The second issue in it that to me is just so difficult is that when we shield those felons, and those felons are guaranteed to return to those undocumented communities, ICE has but one choice: to show up at the schools, to show up in the neighborhoods, to knock on the doors, door by door, looking for those felons. And I'll give you a great example. In January in Los Angeles, 150 warrants were issued for felons in those communities. And along the way, when they were looking for those felons, they picked up 19 people they didn't have felons for. Because when they showed up to the house and they knocked on the door and the felon wasn't home, they asked everybody in that house, do you have papers? Do you have papers? And if they were undocumented, they got collected. If you want to see more of that, then you should support SB 54. But if you don't want to see more of that, you should oppose it like I am. When you look at that, the second thing is, everyone keeps talking about how Trump's going to take the money. The fact of the matter is much of the money, $117 million that goes to public safety. That money comes from grants that you have to apply for. When you shield felons from ICE agents, you lose the ability to apply for those grants. Now, if you're thinking about your local police, or if you're thinking, Kevin, I hate for you to miss this. I'm getting to the good part. So, if you shield those felons and they return to the community, one, they're going to prey on their neighbors again like they did before, and two, it's going to force ICE into it. But there's going to be fewer officers on the street, fewer deputies on the street to protect everyday Californians. Ordinary Californians will have to live in fear because we're going to lose them. Just think about it. If you lose $117 million, and by the way, Secretary Sessions, when he talked about, or AG Sessions, when he talked about it, it was $4.1 billion nationally. And we know the lion's share of the money is spent here in California. We get $50.6 million to offset the cost of housing 11,661 undocumented felons. So when we lose that money, we can't turn around and say, we're not going to pay for that police car anymore. We can't say that we're not going to pay for electricity at the jails, the county jails. We're stuck still having to pay for all those fixed hard costs. The only cost that we truly have control over is labor. So eventually, we're going to lose officers off the beat. Those deputies and those officers, they protect us each and every day. And to lose more officers as we're allowing more felons to be released into our communities, is the wrong direction. It doesn't serve dreamers. It doesn't serve any Californians, documented or undocumented. We talked about the task forces. There's lots of task forces that they're funded through federal monies. We may or we may not be able to have access to it. We heard the author say that he has changed and amended the bill to ensure that we have access to it, but M13 is a Mexican gang. If we have a gang task force who's focused primarily on an undocumented gang, how does that work? We don't know. So we could lose all that participation. You know, you all received a letter from the Sheriff's Association, the California State Sheriff's Association, and they have that concern. So if it wasn't in the bill, they wouldn't still be concerned, but it's still in the bill. A 60-day notice to allow people to know that felons are coming up for parole and allowing ICE to get access to them. That's one of the bright spots of the bill that were amended in, and I want to thank the author for it. But it neglects a simple fact. If I'm a first-time felon and no one's ever taken my fingerprints before, I'm not in that database. There may be as many as 200 pages of Joel Andersons that are serving in prison right now. How do we know that we got the right Joel Anderson? How do we know until ICE has a chance to interview these folks and distinguish between documented and undocumented? They have no way to identify who's in the prison or the county jail or the city jail right now. They have to have that access. And in many of the county jails, ICE actually rents space and does all the work. The sheriffs do nothing with it. And they're just combing through all the felons that are serving in their jails or in the prisons to ensure that they don't get a U.S. citizen and deport them by accident. Look, this is a difficult issue, but this bill doesn't solve it. It creates more problems. It puts more Californians at risk. Members, don't get caught up with the I hate Trump fever. I'm not advocating for everything or anything that the president has said. I'm just trying to do right by my constituents and do right by all Californians. In SB 54, it's the wrong direction. It exposes dreamers like nothing else has ever exposed them before. It returns felons into our communities. That I don't want human traffickers or child abusers or senior abusers back in my community, and I don't want them preying on the undocumented. And I don't want to lose officers off the beat because they save lives every day. So with that, members, I ask for a no vote.